You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to the Win-Win podcast. This is Ben Wolf, your host. As always, we're going to learn from our guest today what you should be thinking about before you become a fractional CFO. And I think a lot of what we're going to be learning here probably applies to people considering going into other kinds of fractional executive leadership as well. Before we get into that conversation, I just want to ask everybody to stop for a second, like, subscribe, leave a review, share, whatever. It just helps get the content out here to more people. But with that, I want to get into introducing our guest today. He is the founder and CEO of Seton Hill, one of the United States' really foremost fractional CFO firms. You can learn more about them at setonhill.com. That's SEATON Hill, HILL.com. And with that, I give you John Ball. Honored to have you, John.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So I guess the first thing I wanted to do to kind of help set up our conversation for people is to get everybody a quick 2-minute background that'll just kind of give everybody the context necessary to understand how we came to be talking about this fractional CFO concept today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I realized a few years ago that I was actually a fractional CFO in my early 30s before fractional CFO existed as a profession.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was division controller for the consumer products division of Beatrice Food. We had 25 companies that we were responsible for. I reported to the division president. And in addition to just keeping him informed about the financial situation of our 25 companies, I was loaned out to help when they needed some help. So, for example, I helped a wire brush manufacturer sell a product line. I helped another company select and install an ERP system. I helped another company acquire another company. All things that strategic CFOs do routinely these days. After that, I worked for 2 technology manufacturing companies and a commercial ship construction and repair company, all 3 of which needed turning around. When those were successful, I was hooked. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be what is now called a fractional CFO. I joined a national CFO firm in 2001. 8 years later, I left to form Seton Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years ago, my co-leader and I decided to take the firm national. So we went from 13 partners to now over 50. Our goal is to serve clients all around the country in all the major metropolitan areas.
Okay, so you're with over 50 members of the team at this point at Seton Hill, you're certainly well positioned to understand who's going to thrive and succeed as a fractional CFO, who's not. So if people are thinking about this before they leave a full-time position, this is a good time to be listening to this conversation. And you were interviewed recently by Strategic CFO 360 about this topic today, right? What to think about before becoming a fractional CFO. I guess the first question is, speaking about this topic or thinking about this topic, what have you seen recently that creates urgency kind of about this issue, about, who should or should not become a fractional CFO?
Yeah, we are seeing a growing trend leading towards fractional leadership as opposed to full-time, especially in the middle and lower middle market companies. And I think what has happened is CEOs are realizing they would rather have access to some really good talent as opposed to going out and doing an exhaustive search for a full-time CFO, maybe making the right decision. But fractional leadership provides the opportunity to bring a world-class person onto your staff, keep them as long as you need them, and not be burdened with some long-term commitment. It just makes better sense to do that.
Now, thinking about now that's kind of on the demand side. What about sort of on the supply side, about people
Yeah.
thinking of going into this field? Is there anything that creates more urgency, or kind of what brings this top of mind right now from the supply side, the talent
Yeah.
side?
Yeah, we see several situations of partners that are joining us. Some of them, and in the early days of Seton Hill, we saw a lot of folks that failed at retirement. they wanted to keep their head in the game, or their wife wanted them out of the house, but whatever. So this made the perfect solution for them. They'd have the independence that a fractional CFO has, but they can also get involved in some very interesting projects. And then we found others that, like you said, they're just frankly tired of the 60-hour work week, big company, 8 to 8 kind of job, and they're considering fractional leadership as an alternative. And then others have what I just call an entrepreneurial itch they want to scratch. They want to try their hand at their own company, or either being an independent CFO or joining another firm. So those are three of the things that we see routinely.
Right. Now, when you think about the people that, not necessarily your firm, but just in general, what you see out there of people trying to go into this field of fractional executive leadership or fractional CFO specifically, and it flopping, and maybe they go back to full time, or they go back to retirement, or it just doesn't work out. What are the main reasons when it doesn't work, when people try to go into this type of field? What are the main things that cause it to happen when it doesn't work out?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to distinguish. If you decide to be a fractional CFO, let's say, you really have two choices. Do you join a firm with other partners, or do you go it alone? I think those that go it alone, and we see them, after a while, they'll come join us. A couple of things. One, while they get to keep 100% of their revenue, they also have to pay 100% of their expenses. They have to do business development, and when they're working, they can't keep the network going. They've got back office tasks to perform. They're out there alone. Whereas if they are in a firm, they can also be independent. There are some firms that are basically are a loose collection of independent contractors with no support from the firm, and those that where there's a lot of support. So I think maybe one of the things that's, when you go on your own, or you're with a firm, there are going to be periods where you're unemployed, and sometimes they could be quite long periods. And so we do see some CFOs rejoining the marketplace and looking for a full-time job. But for the most part, we try to be very careful in the interview process to be sure they know what they're getting into in this consulting lifestyle. It's not for everyone. And then, of course, we've got strong business development support for them. So and a lot of other things. So we're very, our job. I work for our partners. It's to get them engaged as soon as possible.
Who's it not for? You mentioned, that it's not for everyone. Who's it not for?
Well, it's not for those that don't have a financial runway, either a spouse, second income, so they can endure the periods of unemployment. It's not for someone who wants to sit home, watch CNN, and wait for the phone to ring, somebody to bring them a job. I'd say those are probably the two biggest ones. Is you've really got to have the resources, and you've got to be willing to get out and about and do the networking, and not necessarily business development. It's CFOs, when it comes to marketing and sales, we're really good CFOs. We're not.
Right.
So, but for our profession, most all of our prospects come from banks, accounting firms, private equity firms. They know what a CFO does. So there's no teaching them or trying to tell them what we do. It's trying to understand, when we get referred in, try to understand what the client that they refer us to needs, develop the right solution for them, and then go do the job.
Right. Okay, so let's get into the official main topic, right? Which is what to think about before becoming a fractional CFO. So, what are some of the main things that people should think about? You already touched on it a little bit. Before going fractional, what should people be thinking about?
Again, I'm kind of back to that. You got to decide: do you want to do it on your own, or do you want a firm? And I think I've talked about the downside, if you will, of doing it on your own. The upside, obviously, is you keep 100% of the revenue, and that's if you've got a strong network that's providing you with clients.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very attractive option.
Right.
If you decide to join a firm, there are a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of firms, CFO service firms all across the country. Some of them, like us, we're a pure play strategic CFO firm, but there are others that do controller work, accounting services work.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think in looking for the right firm, there are a lot of questions you need to ask. What is the compensation method? We find most firms is a revenue share. So what percentage of that revenue does the partner get to keep? We've seen anywhere from 65% all the way up to 90%. What is the firm's long-term goals? What's the succession plan? Are they going to end up selling the company? Then or not? What's their reputation? Very important to know. And what I'd suggest is ask around, ask banks and accounting firms, who do you guys refer? What firms in town do you think are best in class?
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the big things to consider.
Right.
Oh, the culture. The culture is also huge. Like I said, some firms it's pretty much you're on your own, eat what you kill. But look for a culture where I call it partners helping partners. You've really got to. It's like a tribe or family where everybody is helping each other. If you've got a question about, I'm not as familiar about this industry as my partners, so my partner will give me advice. Or if I need a good asset-based lender in town, who do you suggest? That's very important, hugely important, is to have a team where it really is a team, not just a bunch of individuals out trying to sell themselves.
Right.
So those are some of the things I'd say. Yeah.
And one of the things you spoke about in the interview was, before you going into this, asking yourself or asking others, I don't know what, but what do you expect will happen? Like, what do you expect it to look like? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, it's I think the first, due diligence obviously is something everybody should do. And the due diligence I would suggest to anybody thinking about fractional CFO is you and your family. What do you expect? Why are you doing this? What do you expect will happen? Obviously, are you willing to do the networking and support business development? It's those questions that you'd really you and your spouse or your friends have to wrestle with and be sure you understand why you want to do this. And then once you do, then you've got all kinds of, again, like I said, go it alone or join a firm, and then, as I mentioned, this is how you look for the right firm.
Right. And where does travel fit in? What should people expect in this field when it comes to travel?
Yeah, that's again one of the questions that you just ask yourself: are you willing to travel, or you just want some hometown clients? Nowadays, I think we all recognize working remotely is a lot easier than it used to be. First off, we've got applications like Zoom, and we've learned through COVID that we don't all have to be in the same room all the time. And in fractional CFO, you are the part of the leadership team. In my mind, you're not a consultant. You are very much part of that team that figures out where we're going and how we're going to get there. And you may have to go in. We find this is pretty universal with us. Is our partners, sometimes they have to be in the office, maybe for meetings or planning sessions or whatnot. But as the strategic CFO, you can pretty much manage from afar. You're responsible for the finance function, but you learn how to do it remotely. We actually have one partner. He's never met face to face his client. They work entirely. They hired him remotely, and he works remotely. So I think that's clearly it's a question that, hey, if there's a client that absolutely requires you to be in the office, we have one that he lives in Detroit, but he works in California. They moved him up there, and he's willing to do that. It's an interim job, so he expects to be back home, in a few months. But they needed him there, so it varies. But I think it's a question everybody should ask themselves: are you willing to do the travel? If not, that's okay too. There's a lot of we find a lot of we work for a lot of clients in our hometowns, so
right.
I think one of the advantages of being a fractional CFO is the independence that goes with it. You can decide whether or not you can handle this particular assignment. You can decide if you've got chemistry with the CEO. You can decide if the compensation is right for you, and you can decide, if you're willing, if how much travel is involved. So there's some real advantages to being a fractional leader. And independence is one of them. Even though you're with a firm, you still
Right.
You still get to make those decisions.
Now let's say someone has decided that they're going into this field, they get a client, they get a fractional CFO client or any kind of fractional executive client. What are the main, I guess the main things people need to keep in mind to be successful in that engagement so that it doesn't end up in a flop, right? That they are actually successful.
Yeah. Huge. I'd say here's a process I'd suggest is, first off, if you have a prospect, obviously you're going to go talk to them. You're going to do your research in advance, knowing what their business is, what their competition is, learn as much about them before you get there. And then listen, start asking good business questions about what their need is. Get clear in your mind what exactly is it they want. You want to get lined up expectations. You don't want to go in thinking this is the problem and the CEO thinks there's something else. Once you have that, then stop, pause, and consider, what do you have a solution for that? What is that solution? And what kind of investment in time is it? And then be very clear about what you're going to accomplish with that client, and then and be darn sure that you could do it. You don't take on assignments where you feel it's maybe not, because the success of your client is the sole mission. You're going to be judged. Your firm's going to be judged by whether or not you're successful in helping clients be successful as they want to be.
Let me ask you. Okay. Yeah. Let me ask you this, and I'll ask you one question afterwards, but just so you have some moment to think about it. A story or example of maybe somebody from the team, how they started into this fractional executive field, what they did and how it's going. If you can think of a good example like that. And I can ask you another question in the meantime, if you want to think about that for a minute. But before that, I guess wondering what kind of clients do you need to avoid, or I don't know, or how do you define what is a right client for you or is not a right client for you when you start thinking about which clients to take on?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I think the fun that we're having here is the diversity of clients, their personalities, their mission, their problems. But some of the things, just some examples of some things we've done. First of all, as I said, we're pure play strategic. So although we may have to go in and set up the controller's office or maybe even replace the office, but our major goal is again part of that leadership team. So some things we've done, we just recently completed taking a company public. We just recently signed on with a new production studio, movie production studio, to raise the capital help them raise the capital to build their studios and grow. We've encountered some situations where we're going to a small company, as we did one. I think it was about 10 million in revenue. Banks would not return his phone calls because he was barely breaking even. But banks returned our phone calls. And so we were able to go in, raise the working capital he needed to get his backlog produced. A very sharp entrepreneur, knew how to price his projects and control them. He's now 300 plus million and still growing, and we're still there as his fractional CFO. Those are the kind of stories we live for. And our clients become family. It's interesting. We really serve our clients in three different ways. One is their fractional CFO, where we're on board. We're in touch 24/7. The other way is as the interim, so we can go in when they don't have a CFO, they've lost them for whatever reason, and be there until they do their search and bring somebody on. But often, more times than not, they find out after we get there, at least the smaller ones do, they don't need a full-time CFO.
Right.
They need us. And then we do project work. We can raise capital, we can take you public, we can help you sell your company. So those are the kind of things. In terms of the clients that you want to avoid, there's several situations. First and foremost, if there's any hint of malfeasance, any hint of wrongdoing, any hint that CEO is a little shady, run away. Don't walk away, run away.
Especially in the finance function.
Especially the finance function. You've got a fiduciary responsibility, and our firm's reputation at stake. We don't want to be on the front page of the financial section. So, and sometimes you don't find that out until after you get there. Yes, it looks like a good situation. We've had a few of those where we went in and then discovered some things we didn't know when we walked in, and therefore we walk away. So the other thing I would say is occasionally, and sometimes you don't know this until you get there, is the CEO going to listen to you? You've agreed on what you're trying to accomplish, and they just go in the opposite direction. They go, they just don't have an ear for it. That's also, if you can discover that up front, don't go in. But if you discover you can't be there, really help them, why are you there? You're wasting their time, your time, their money. So those are the two big ones, I would say.
Right. Awesome. Anything else, I guess, you would add in terms of thinking about the actual fractional CFOs themselves, in terms of what the experience is like, or like, I don't know, like a good experience or bad experience somebody had getting into this field and how it went for them?
Yeah, I started as a fractional CFO back in 2001. So I've been at it a few years, and I obviously love it. But yeah, the partners that sometimes they get into it and it's just not for them. There's a couple of reasons. There's some partners that are highly technical. They're the best in class for their technical ability or their industry knowledge, but they're not what I would call camera ready. They just have difficulty communicating, and they fail interviews. And again, there's those that they don't get engaged as quickly as they hoped, and then they leave. But the ones that like it, in my view, love it. It is a wonderful profession. Yeah, the diversity, the success, the different people you meet, and your partners. I mean, it's a I've only known a culture both here and at a former company that I worked with, where the culture was really a partners helping partners. It's family. And we get together weekly. Regionally, we get together weekly, nationally, and you've actually been part of that, where it's all hands on deck, and we learn things from folks like you and others. And but it's also a chance to meet, keep in touch with your partners.
Right.
So,
yeah, no, I appreciate it. I always say that I always talk about the three mores of fractional leadership, which you spoke about, which is more fun, more flexibility, and more money. Right. And more fun you spoke about with just more variety of clients, and more variety of clients, and making a difference, and less embedded in all the admin work and the stuff that's not really at your expertise level.
Right.
Or more flexibility because you can make more money in less client work time. You can have that time to spend on causes that are important to you, family or
Yes.
people or passions that you're passionate about, and also more money than you can full time in less time. So I don't know. That's just, the way I like to think about it.
We do too.
Well, anyway, John, I really appreciate it. Again, people can find out more about your firm at Seatonhill, SEATONHILL.com. And definitely, obviously one of the foremost fractional CFO firms out there. I think you guys started in Dallas, expanded to Fort Worth, then expanded around the country. Is that?
We have, ultimately, we're looking to grow into all the major metropolitan areas. We are right now focused in Atlanta, Central Florida, Boston, New York, the tri-state area around New York, Chicago, Dallas, Houston. We're started in Dallas, but we're building our Houston office. We're actively looking for partners, and we're looking for a managing partner out in Orange County, California. That's another big area that we're focused on. But ultimately, I think our appetite is probably the top 20 metropolitan areas in the country.
Right, nice.
We want to be able to answer the phone and say, yes, I don't care what industry you are, what you need.
Yeah, exactly. I actually have a lead possibly for you in Atlanta, but we can talk about that after.
Okay,
anyway,
very good.
But anyway, yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for making the time and, for teaching about this. I think people thinking of getting into this field, it's going to be super valuable conversation. So really appreciate it.
Really I had a lot of fun, Ben. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And we will see everybody else on the other side. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.